See you.
I was near him. Here.
He was, yeah, wait. Well, that was, you're talking about when John Paul was here.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was here in '99. I've not met the present, but I had met Benedict and John Paul. So,
Is the Holy See, is that another?
so there's the spiritual, and then there's the secular. So there's some intertwining going on. So there's the Vatican is the secular see. So there's the Vatican City, there's a whole government, there's structures. There they have relationships with other countries. They're a country into themselves. So the Vatican is a recognized nation. So there's the governmental part of that. And the Holy See is about more of the religious, the spiritual side. So the Holy See it's the structure that, so it's easy kind of, if you know our American structures of government from executive, legislative, judicial, the Holy See is much the same in the, so we have the executive to be like the Pope, just like our president. Then there, just as there's cabinet posts, the Holy See has like the office of bishop, the office of clergy, the office of worship and sacraments, of human rights. On and on there's about 8 main offices, and then there's all kinds of communication. There was all kinds of other offices that do the work of the Holy See, and often that's to the charity. So there's that is another term, but the term more relates to those actions that lead for the spiritual life of the community. Well, if you just said the Vatican City is more about the structural, the political life of the church. And then, so the way the church is structured, so certain areas it's broken down into dioceses. So every diocese has a bishop that leads that diocese. Some dioceses are larger ones, or archdioceses. So St. Louis is an archdiocese. There's, like in the United States, there's 33 archdioceses and about 160 dioceses all through.
What does diocese mean, or what's
A diocese is it's an area,
geographical area?
yeah, that it's underneath the offices of a bishop who has been appointed by the See of Rome or the Vatican or the Pope, who is the successor to St. Peter. So they have all these apostolic successions they look back into. So bishops are appointed, approved by the Pope.
You might recall when Dr. Madden had his talk, he talked about Diocletian.
Yeah.
And Diocletian in the Roman Empire set up these different areas that were governed, basically run by governors. And the church can call that model. It's kind of ironic that Diocletian was the biggest persecutor of the church, and they named dioceses after him. So they're just geographical areas that are controlled by a bishop or.
So are like the other, so there's like Franciscans and there's Jesuits and all that, are they all underneath the bishop in a diocese as well?
Well, in some respects and some not. I mean, for their own internal running, usually they have a provincial or some leader of that community. Local community, national, international, there's those different levels of that, depending on the structure of that order. But for like public worship and that, yeah, they're underneath the auspices of the bishop.
Yeah, so it's administrative king of the diocese, you have to be commissioned the bishop.
Okay.
Right.
And just stay there, right?
And the state area.
So we have, so there's different, what some are set up. In different ways, different orders have different charisms and different practices, like. The way Benedictines are structured or is different than a Jesuit. About who has governance and who has rulership, and so you have to look at each group and see how are they structured.
Is there like a Franciscan church?
There are some,
Okay,
but it might be they're just it might be though there's Franciscans at a church necessarily, it's not necessarily a Franciscan, but there's still ministry in there. But there could be a Franciscan church too.
Like
So like-
Slew was a Jesuit.
right. So like, is the church,
But they're also, there's the Jesuits were at St. Matthew's, and that's not a Jesuit. Yeah. So there's depending, you have to, again, he's got to know some of the history behind it, but
Following the Pope, but they have like kind of some obedience to like the diocese or the local bishop.
And some have like permanence as part of their charism. It's sort of like the Benedictines here in St. Louis. They have a charism that they stay here. Now, that's kind of interesting because the bishop also has some authority to keep them or not. But that's part of their charism, that they establish community in a particular area and stay in that area. That's kind of part of their charism, but not every order is set up that way.
So like the Carmelite monastery out on Clayton Road.
so though they're a cloistered order. And they're staying there, they're connected to that community.
So
And they
they
would
don't
say-
go out in the world. They are,
They have an extern that does some of that.
That just means like someone goes like does a shopping for them or something like that. Right?
They would go out to appointment if they had to for something like a doctor's or something. I think when the Pope came, they were given permission to go.
how do they celebrate their mass?
The priest comes in.
But they have a chaplain to some. I mean, some orders have like orders of priests. So, like Carmelites have orders of priests.
Right,
But some don't.
but like, because I know there's the nuns or the sisters are there permanently. Do they then have in separate area the priest? Or
Yes,
does he
yeah.
come in from?
It can be both and.
Yeah.
Okay.
So some do have like a place, like the Pink Sisters, for instance, down in North City. They had a chaplain, and the chaplain had his own private residence.
Quarters, yeah.
And he was still, he basically just be signed for that area, and the sisters live in a different area. Or someday they have the priest come in,
Okay.
so it just depends.
So they're, yeah, again, you have to kind of know the rules and. I'm a canon lawyer, so I've had to go to some of these places sometimes and if they're gonna elect somebody, there has to be for the leadership. Somebody notarizing that and doing that. But I couldn't even, I can't go into their cloister. I had to be, there's a room outside, they're on
Behind a grill.
behind a grill and I'm on the other side. I mean, you could talk to each other, but
when you say like establish a community, I always think of a church as a community. So establishing a community of,
So we have, so church, I have to understand there's different levels of that, so it's like the
Yeah.
big C church,
yeah,
and like smaller, like church buildings or community. So, like St. Gabriel is a local church.
yeah.
Right, under the auspices of a pastor, who's as obedience to the bishop, that kind of thing, right? And yeah, so we have different communities that are established by orders. So, like I was here mentioned, St. Louis University.
Mhm.
Or, like here in South City, St. Anthony of Padua is a parochial church, but it's run by the Franciscans. So it all depends on the structure, but so the church is always a community that's centered around the bishop, guided by the Eucharist, right? And led by the Holy Spirit. So that's how
Almost like a denomination.
no,
Yeah.
because the difference is we're all enlightened in the part of belief and faith, right? So even Jesuit Franciscans, we all share the common faith and the common teaching of the church.
Yeah.
And even they owe obedience, even they owe obedience to that particular bishop or their provincial that also is in line.
It's organized but not organized.
Right.
so a diocese
Just a way to-
is then divided into parishes. Because the bishop is the chief pastor of a diocese.
Mhm.
But because of the size, he can't be everywhere, so he has priests, presbyters, they are assigned to different communities, just as Father Mark and I were assigned here. we're priests of the diocese, we're under the bishop, but we also have the responsibility for the care of the souls of this community.
Not just Catholics.
Anybody, if you live in the boundaries, you're a member, whether you're registered or not, and if people are registered, don't live in the boundaries, but are registered, they're all members. So they do have territorial area for good management and governance, but a parish is really a people that have connected themselves to this community.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is before I approached Father Mark last summer, I was living up near Epiphany.
Right.
Had I been in need of anything spiritual, could I just have called up Epiphany and said, help?
I would,
Or would,
that's my understanding.
or would he?
I mean, in theory, that's correct. In practicality, I couldn't tell you, it should happen. I didn't, but
But I mean, or?
Yeah, so in that case, you said, hey, Father Renier, since you're living in his boundary, he would have pastoral responsibility for you.
But could he have said, could you have said, you're not Catholic? Find someone in your own denomination, your own belief system.
I could have, but I would.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
because again, like, it's a universal church, like one fully Catholic apostolic, which means that this church is for all.
So,
I would say if a priest didn't do that, they're not fulfilling their function.
okay, so in other words, that was my unofficial invitation into the church,
Yeah.
because I said, I don't know what to do.
And in those cases, like some people live outside of our boundary, and what I do in those circumstances, just make sure everyone's on the same page. I contact that pastor and say, look, this person's coming to us. Would you want me to send them to you, or you, and usually they're like, yeah, fine.
Okay.
So, like, once you're saying, there's the theoretical, how it's supposed to work, and then there's actual practical, which usually doesn't work theoretically.
That's where the whole.
I mean, look, our own governments, we have, but everything doesn't always work the way it's set up.
It's also more complicated here, because like where I was in Texas, there was like one Catholic church that had like thousands of members that covered a whole swath. of
Yeah,
land.
right.
It's just
It's
it's like
structured.
St. Louis has a Catholic church every like mile or so. Like,
So it was set up, yeah, because it's a lot older area of Catholicism. This was,
Can you talk about it being an apostolic church? It took me a long time to really understand.
an apostolic.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, all that means is that it flows out of the apostle Jesus, the Last Supper. They initiated the Eucharist, and then he also told Peter that he would build his church upon him, that he would be the rock. And so Jesus passed on to the apostles the mission of his making known the Father's kingdom. The apostles then appointed just different presbyters, other bishops as it went down, and then, but the see of Rome, the see of St. Peter, who was the first bishop of Rome, was considered the primary. So,
And the reason it was a primary is because where Peter died. So that was his last like seat, right? He was a bishop of other places, but then he moved on and appointed other people behind him. And he ended up in Rome, and that's where he actually died as the bishop of Rome. And that's been the tradition of the church, that every archbishop and bishop, they would basically be buried in the last place they were actually the bishop.
So that is kind of like a line of authority all the way back to St.
so that's the apostolic part, that it flows back to the apostles who were missioned by Christ to continue that work of making known the Father's kingdom. They passed it on to other and then as society grew and as the world grew, it got passed on and on and on. Each bishop was supposed to take the main pastor. Each, as his area grew bigger, he couldn't do it all. They named presbyters, and that's why in the Western Church, confirmation stayed a little separate. In the Eastern Church, when you're baptized, you also get confirmed and receive communion, so you get all three of the sacraments of initiation. So that's why when somebody is received in the church, they're given the sacraments of initiation, so you'll all be confirmed, receive the Eucharist. Those that aren't baptized will be baptized. And but in the Western Church, mostly the pastor, the bishop was the one who would do the confirmation, so he'd go to show some of that connectedness, that pastoral care that he has. Which is said is different than the Eastern Church, how it does it.
So getting back to the.
Do you understand that Eastern and Western, have they talked about that?
Yeah.
So getting back to the Pope, and I'm working on the infallibility
Right,
of his teachings,
only teachings, faith and morals, not every teaching,
only teachings on faith.
faith and
morals.
morals. And so, I mean, if he said a teaching on chemistry, it's not an infallible teaching.
Okay, common sense stuff. But is his word the end of the discussion?
Well, usually it's done in communion with the,
The magisterium?
right,
Okay. But after all the study and prayer and dialogue, and then that example, Pope Francis says, A and B are good, but I prefer my choice.
but some of those aren't those teachings, those might be instructions.
Okay,
So you have to understand what document is saying, what
okay,
level it's on, it's very complicated. So everything that comes out of the Pope isn't infallible teaching.
right,
Some, I mean, and they're giving some guidance, instructions.
So to that point, Kate, I mean, you could say there could be development of doctrine, but that would still be established and then maybe grow from there, right? So in other words, if a Pope were to make the statement infallible, meaning it's in line with our faith and morals, it's in line with the teaching of the church, and he's doing it as the Pope, right? So like, not just on an airplane talking to a reporter, he's actually, here's a document I've reviewed and signed and then promulgated. He can say something, establish something, but then that can be developed later. But a Pope wouldn't be able to come back and say, whatever he said is wrong, I'm going to change it now.
as in what a previous Pope had said.
Correct. If it's infallible,
Okay,
right? If it's actually done in that way,
okay,
right? Yeah.
all right,
Does he also say, I am speaking infallibly, or he acknowledges
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
when he is establishing something that is infallible.
I mean, you may not necessarily see the word or hear the words, I infallibly teach this, but you can say there was certain clues to say that he's actually doing it as.
Usually he signed it himself. Sometimes stuff comes out from other offices that aren't from they think it's from the Vatican, so that doesn't mean necessarily from the Pope. It's from different offices giving instructions in different areas of the life of the church.
but he's aware of what's being set out, given out, passed out.
Yeah.
To the most extent, the person in charge of a worldwide giant organization can be.
So, I mean, you would hopefully you'd have people there that aren't gonna do something. But they have come back. I mean, Benedict said something, he said something different about the 62 mass, whether that can be,
That was
how
my
that
next
could-
question.
how that can be used or how it should be. He didn't say it was invalid. His looking at it says that he thought it was causing disruption. So he was limiting it to certain places. We still have in the diocese, he didn't outlaw it, but he did restrict how it can be used.
And that could be an example that like maybe that could possibly be over. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily infallible teaching,
Okay,
right? He's just saying, as the Pope, I'm looking at this from this perspective, and we should probably do something to overcome this. But this isn't the infallible teaching.
That's not an infallible teaching.
okay,
The guy, I forget who the history professor came in and told us, he was very specific in like what had to work, so I would.
yeah,
It's fair to say it's pretty rare.
Yeah, but he does. I mean, they don't, I mean, because a lot of, I mean, like. The creed are almost, he couldn't, those are pretty infallible
They've been
statements.
around for,
The
ever.
magisterium and, I mean, he's not trying to work against. The church or the bishops, no.
he's not making changes just to make them. There's a purpose.
Yeah,
And a
and
reason
like
behind it.
anybody that has that final responsibility. He then has to make some decisions that maybe everybody's not gonna agree with.
Right.
You take. Any parent or child, parent might make a decision, the child might not agree with it, but that doesn't mean that it was. Wrong, but they would see it different, but the parent has that. Ultimate responsibility to make that decision, so that's
Right.
how the Pope. Did it more, he thought, I mean, he said he said he did, because he thought it was for the betterment. Of the church, he thought the other was causing division. Now, somebody could disagree with that, but that's. He was in the position that he had to make a decision, and that's the decision he made.
So Father Mark, how does your Latin Mass Novus Ordo fit
Because
into that?
It's not a
that's
question.
extraordinary form of mass.
Right,
So there's particular rights and things in the extraordinary form that are different from the Novus Ordo. So
Okay.
basically doing the same math we do over here at St. Gabriel, except in Latin.
So there's really no difference, other than we don't understand everything you're saying.
It could be, but but where there's slight difference between what's called the traditional Latin and the Novus Ordo. One of which would be the different vestments you would wear. There's also like different actions within the rite that would be different between the two. And so you would notice those things specifically. Even if in Latin or not, you would notice these differences in the Latin Mass compared to the Novus Ordo.
if you go to Rome, a lot of the masses are in Latin there, it's a universal. In St. Peter's now, yeah, and I've been there for, and. So they might have do some of the. Petitions or readings in different languages, when they have like the big universal mass.
Another difference too, is sometimes the calendar could be different too. I mean, but like for instance, on March 20th, well, that's universal, I guess, that we would say, right? But yeah, certain dates are different. Like we would celebrate one certain saint maybe in the Novus Ordo, and then maybe a completely different saint with TLM on the same day. So it just
So so that's what he was restricting. He had nothing to do with the Norvis, or it had to do with the 62 liturgy.
the 60 liturgy is the Tridentine or the traditional Latin Mass, and the extraordinary.
Okay.
That's what they celebrate down at this St. Francis Sales oratory.
Yeah, to call it the Latin Mass is a little confusing because they're all Latin, so I mean.
Yeah, they're all based on Latin.
Okay.
But that's, so the whole structure of the Holy See, the Vatican, dioceses are kind of structured. They have a bishop, they have different offices, they have different they've broken down to different areas. So there is, each nation has like their national office. Now it's more about commonality and some national programs. It's not about governance when they have, like they get of the different every diocese has, the bishop has, as long as he's in communion, I mean, he's the one that controls. Another bishop can't tell him what to do.
So he's basically autonomous.
He is, and that's good. And there's a little problem sometimes if somebody goes willy-nilly. There's not many checks and balances.
And that comes into like, we talk about subsidiarity, right? So if a bishop were to say, let's say, teach something that's not from like the Catholic faith, the Pope doesn't have the responsibility to come in and correct. Right. No, but he can't tell that bishop like how to administer.
Right, we had talked about that before.
But it was also necessary because until like 70 years ago, communicating with someone from here to Rome would have been months. So they needed that level of time. It's the same reason like a boat captain in the Navy or something has that like high level of autonomy, is because until recently it didn't. They had to have that level because you couldn't get to them.
So the papal primacy is the Bishop of Rome So he has the name Pope, he has lots of names, titles. One of their favorite, they call him the servant of the servants. And you'll see, if imitating Christ said, I came not to be served, but to serve. So they are, you'll find, I said, Pontiff, Holy Father, Pope, Bishop of Rome, they're all talking about the same person, different aspects about that person.
Before Pope Benedict died, and he was living
Mhm.
in one area of the Vatican, and Pope Francis was living in another area. Who was higher?
There's only one pope.
So Pope Francis. Okay,
So what Benedict did was kind of novel. Was he took on a title emeritus. So no time before in history, even if a pope did retire, which happened before, they wouldn't take on the title of Pope Emeritus. Typically, they would be made of archbishop somewhere, and that would be their new title. So that was novel. Even wearing the white cassock and everything was something new
okay.
that Pope Benedict did. So it's kind of confusing because it never happened before in the history of the church that way. But there was still understanding that Pope Francis was the Pope.
Was in charge.
Right. Pope Benedict, he was no longer the Pope. After he retired.
Was it really because of age and illness and things like that, because he couldn't be assigned somewhere else?
Well, I mean, the reason he gave for retiring from the papacy was his health. But he could still be made a titular bishop somewhere. So I mean, so what that means is a titular bishop is someone that is a bishop, but they don't really have practical authority in a particular see because the see doesn't exist anymore.
So Benedict had no authority in that once he resigned.
Once he retired.
He had less than a parish priest.
But he was still maybe not accorded the.
He was a bishop.
But he was,
emeritus.
what am I trying to say? Even though he had no responsibility, he was still treated in such manner.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
He would do, like we have Archbishop Carlson's retired here. He has no governance, no authority in the diocese anymore.
But you still would address him as Archbishop?
Oh, sure, because he is.
You don't lose that. I mean, same thing like once someone is consecrated or ordained.
And you want to care for that person and
Okay,
just, so yeah, he's,
Yeah, the bishop is not an honorific title, that's actually the level of the order. Right, so you're consecrated a bishop. And once you're a bishop, you're always a bishop.
okay.
So what's the Pope Emeritus? What did that mean? That he
just
did?
retired,
Okay, so you just kind of said I retired.
emeritus, like they have that term, yeah.
That way some of his comments were a little controversial, if he spoke out still.
Yeah, I mean, I guess,
There's lots of conspiracy theories.
I
On the internet.
I don't know if he was speaking out that much.
Yeah, I really don't.
I never heard him say anything about Francis, that he was wrong or anything, he never said it.
He made a very specific point of deferring and saying, I'm not the Pope anymore.
Right. I mean, literally, he has no, he's the Pope Emeritus, there are, the Emeritus of Bishop of Rome is probably more, might be a better title.
Pope Benedict, what I remember is like, I can be wrong, clear enough, that, you know, he was pretty surprised at the papacy bells to him, right? I mean.
Well, I mean, so his plan.
He wanted to retire, he was made Pope, and
And then he said, Pope, and so we're like, well, now think about it. The Pope he can say no. The Pope, and once you're elected Pope.
I think
you
it
have the option to
was
say no.
77 or 8 when he was named, yeah.
Right, yeah, I mean, so he had the option, but I think he felt, well, you know, I've been called to this is the work of the Holy Spirit, so I'm gonna try. And he did for, what, it was 9 years?
8.
Oh,
Yeah.
and he almost was like a bridge.
Yeah.
I mean, he was almost the bridge too.
Well, there's a good tradition in the church of, you know, kind of long papacy, small papacy. You kind of see that in the history of the church, where some popes are popes very short, and some popes are popes very long. Usually they kind of coincide with each other or something.
It was the Pope before, Saint John Paul II was very important.
John Paul II was 25 years.
Yeah.
And John Paul I was 30 days. So, yeah, it was very short.
So- Some of this stuff has been developing, even the idea of Pope is developed over the year. So when Peter was here, no one called him the Pope.
They just call him Peter. Or,
I mean, and even. I don't think the structures we have now aren't structures were set up. The church was just beginning. There was local churches. The Church of Rome, the Church of Ephesus, the Church of Jerusalem. So we didn't have that same structure that we have now. It wasn't until like the 5th century that they started even using that term pope.
But there's always was kind of a deference to Rome, like even
Yeah.
very early church, like the 1st century, and other bishops, there was a dispute, they would always go to Rome and say, what do you think? Or the Bishop of Rome, you're the See of Peter, what do you say?
They do some early letters in the Ignatius of Antioch, and the person had written things about that primal see there.
And he was the 2nd bishop of Antioch after Peter. And so this is very early on, you see this deference. Even the gospel, you see John defer to Peter all the time.
And you can go and see his bones.
So you have a wide variety of diet. I mean, you could have a diocese, you could have a pope, and maybe I went to school with a guy, he was the Bishop of Broome, Australia. Broome, Australia has more alligators than people. It's in the northwest of Australia. And
Yeah.
I think they had 13 priests in his diocese. And so it'd be like, like we would think of Alaska way up. I mean, you flew a plane to get around.
We've been respected, we have about 30 priests in our deanery, which is like this area of South Dakota.
And then you have some, I mean, you go to Rome, New York, there's hundreds of priests. So some of it's dependent on the population, the people, the church. But an episcopal was kind of considered the Greek, an overseer. So he was there. He had the responsibility of caring for that community. And the elders were the presbyters, or if you go back to some of the structures. So the church took some of these structures in the community and used those, and as Rome had set up some of their government, some of the church followed that. But the Pope, he said he's the Bishop of Rome, he has the primacy of Peter. He approves every bishop that is in the world. There's an office of bishops that'll give up names, and some I think they meet weekly with him just to go over different ones. He probably knows some, probably others he doesn't know about. He trusts these other people.
The same with the president picks judges and all of that kind
Right.
of stuff, but he's not gonna know every single regional district A.
Yeah, the line of authority, it might.
Oftentimes, you go back to the part of their legion and ask them about that, and so,
Okay.
this person, what do you think about that?
I could ask him if he knows like where Wichita, Kansas is. He might not know, kind of, but he might not know much about it. And
Okay.
so he takes the advice of people that he thinks has that responsibility. So here, the way a person gets here, usually we have a papal representative in our country. It has it's been like an ambassador that we do in other countries. This person would get names from different regions who could be possible bishops. They vet it, they'll send out letters to people that they know might have knowledge, they'll get information, they'll put together a dossier, they'll send it to the office of bishops, they'll do some more vetting depending on the level, and then eventually they make some decisions, and the Pope okays that. Some of the real large dioceses is probably more hands-on, but those.
You probably heard the term papal nuncio, that's kind of the representative.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's kind of.
So there is it's usually coming out of, so there is a process of trying just to raise. Sometimes the Pope, he'll name a few people on his own if he really wanted somebody. So he has that ability. So that's, the Pope also though is that he's the spirit. If you go back in the history of the papacy, there was something called the Papal States. I don't know if you know, in Italy, half of Italy was all owned by the papacy. Now it's down to 1 mile. The papal are the country of the Vatican, but it used to take all of the middle of Italy. And so it happened when governments dropped and a lot of the Roman was falling apart, their whole structure. Often the bishop became kind of the authority of an area. And eventually the bishop moved into also to governance besides the spiritual life. He was the civil governance area. So the Pope, it gets a little murky at sometimes because some of the popes we hear a lot of doing their civil governance more than we hear about their religious background. But so they had the structure for the church, some had the structures for the papal states. Then I think the Pope also, especially in the last few hundred, has the a moral call for humanity. So he's will make some call people to make good moral judgments. Different countries will sometimes speak out. So he has some of that part. So he has, besides he has a small little part now of any civil governance. He has a little bit. Most of his is ecclesial, and then I think it expands into the worldwide community of being a voice of goodness for humanity. That he becomes a spokesperson. Somebody said, well, how many armies does he have? What kind of power are they going to give him? And his is a different type of power.
Well, the Vatican City does technically have a really good army.
Well, they have, they call it Swiss Guards. And I don't know if you.
Could we declare war to the Pope?
Oh, they have in the past.
Well, I think people tend to forget sometimes the role of a lot of diplomacy. So you think about the Cold War, the second one with the is all right, we're very instrumental in bringing down communism.
So he is the head of a state. He is a sovereign. He has sovereign immunity. So he has that setting. It's different than some other churches. He has that recognition. And so being a head of a state, he gets involved in, and sometimes is set into those international issues that go on. As Father Mark said, he was involved with Russia and will make statements and then I think there was a split in the church. I think he probably went over that, Dr. Madden, about the Orthodox and about recognizing the Pope as the head.
Yeah.
So the Eastern Church sees some patriarchs that all Western churches are all, Latin unionates, and Latin churches and Eastern churches that are in union would all see him as the head of the church. We have like St. Raymond's Church is a Marianite rite, so they do out of Lebanon. So some of they have Arabic in their liturgies, but they are in union with the church. But there's some like the Greek church. There's Greek Unionate and there's Greek Orthodox. There's Russian Unionate and Russian Orthodox that are some are in union, some aren't. Sacramentally, we have a lot of, if an Orthodox person would come here, that they believe in the Eucharist, we do. We recognize that agreement. They could come to the Eucharist here.
We had talked about that earlier,
So I guess if you look at this, as I said, so you hear about Pope, you have to know the different functions, so he's either doing it spiritually, usually that's today, sometimes he's involved in international things, relations, other times it's a very, I mean, there's a little governance, he doesn't do too much, have a lot anymore, but he is, as I said, head of a state. He is, got that sovereign immunity. So right now, the Pope is elected by the cardinals, college of cardinals. Anybody under 80 is allowed to vote. They go into a conclave, they call it. That meant clave was the word for key, so it's with key. So they say literally lock them in a room and they go to a voice, and they will, through ballots, they make a decision of who the Pope is. That's one of their main functions.
What color is the smoke when they call either side?
White. And so,
And who's also a basic question, who's also would be the Pope?
Anyone in good standing in the church.
Any Catholic makes on the vote.
Oh, yeah. The guy.
So once they're elected Pope and accepted, they are then the Pope. Which also means they would have to be eventually ordained, but they are the head of the church once they're accepted.
so that was, so there's both the head of his diocese, and he has the universal role of being the primacy of being that successor of Peter, of being that focal point. Doesn't mean that he has control over everything. He does not get involved. He can't get involved in internal runnings of a diocese, but he has faith and morals, we're seeing. So that's just like a bishop here does not have involved, tell the Jesuits how to do their internal runnings, but he does have overseen
Make sure that what
public
they're
worship, faith and morals.
teaching- Make sure that what they're teaching is in accordance with church doctrine.
Yeah, and so the Pope, so it has to go those external, the internal things, they don't. Things that touch the public, they have that overseen. There's so they talk sometimes about the Roman Curia, that the Curia is just the leadership, the people that work in the different offices there.
Or maybe,
Work well, whatever it said, yeah. That was that old quick. Somebody said they asked John the 23rd how many people work in the Vatican. He said about half of them. It's an old joke.
Does he receive a salary?
I don't think the Pope takes a salary, but other bishops take salaries. And I mean, it's, you don't have
Just
to.
because I'm nosy, are you paid?
I'm paid.
You are. I didn't know that.
Well, I have to pay taxes. I gotta pay my health insurance I pay for, and I have to pay for,
I guess because of where I'm coming from and
the
Mormons make a big deal out of it, they do not have a paid clergy. I was just kind of thinking that,
so archdiocesan priests, so when we talk about different orders, like Franciscan, they take an order of poverty.
right,
So they basically live based on what the order provides for them.
how is that done? I mean, do they
Okay.
get donations?
Yeah, I mean, so
Okay.
some are like called like begging orders. And so people give them money or whatever, I mean, so,
mendicant.
yeah, then what's called mendicant order. Diocesan archdiocesan priests don't take vow of poverty. It's often said, and this is another running joke, that, order priests take the vow while archdiocesan priests live it. So if you're going to It's kind of an old joke, but, there's some truth to that in some ways. I mean, sometimes order priests live a lot better than our Catholic priests, just because of what they're provided. But again, it's still not as much as like. I would imagine that we as priests probably take on the lower end from what the people in this particular areas. And that's usually how it should be, sometimes, right? So I would imagine many priests probably would be fined by the IRS in the poverty state,
Okay.
you know.
So you make 24,000. Good money? No.
Well,
Annually, it's horrific.
Huh?
Annually, that's terrible.
$600 a month in health insurance out of that.
you're already poor, then that's good money. But what I was going to ask then is, do you take donations of food and of service?
I'm not. I mean, you could, if somebody, somebody gives us, we take it, we don't,
You
we're not,
don't, you don't shun it.
no. But somebody else can.
What else is, I mean, probably, a lot of times priests don't do it themselves. They have extra income, they usually tend to rise in a little bit for needs.
So how does it work? Like, so I guess the church provides housing, right? And then, food, you have to buy on your own, or they provide that?
We buy
That's all.
food,
Yeah,
a certain stuff, but I mean, I don't buy any extra, I mean, I don't buy alcohol, that's on me.
Right.
I mean,
you'd have to buy your own car.
to buy my own car,
Yeah.
insurance, health
Yeah.
insurance, I pay.
Well, so you would need something. to live.
Doctor bills or.
Yeah.
If you have anything. Get your
Many
teeth,
priests
get your
like save
teeth
up money
clean,
and
get,
at their will, say to donate the money to like Catholic charities or some other, or that happens, but.
and then you give. We're constantly getting money, asking for money,
Asking you for money.
yes. Any charity, because once you start giving, they give you,
Yeah.
they give you a thank you and then an envelope with that thank
On a
you.
weekly basis.
Wow.
Yeah. You would think this neighborhood would get a lot of people, like, we get a lot of people come to the door on a weekly basis.
I can see that.
So it's, nobody's doing it for the money, but I mean, it's like Jesus said, the labor deserves his wages.
Yes.
Okay.
I went to a church that had unpaid clergy as well, and they weren't unpaid, they just had everything they wanted bought for them.
Yeah.
Plus somebody else's card, so.
Don't.
Let's put it this way, if I wanted money, I would stay where I was. I wouldn't think. I was like, maybe a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Most are pretty, I mean, try to be generous.
It's easier for camel to pass through the eye of a needle,
There you go.
or gotta make a dab.
There's that somewhere.
So, like, for the military, like, when I was in the military, nobody ever, like, talked about salary just because you can go on the internet and look up anybody's salary. Does the church have that same thing with, like, transparency, like how money is allotted or anything kind of like that, or is that up to the church? Like,
I don't know, I mean, I don't think
Okay.
it's not on our website, but it's
Okay.
no big dark secret.
Right, it's just I was just curious based on,
I mean, I think only our case.
okay,
And then the review, like, it would be like another organization.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, typically there's kind of an increase based on like cost of living, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, no one's, let's put it this way, no one's making, 6 figures.
right.
I could not, yeah, I mean, there's, could be a few who have special job, but there's not many.
How much control do you have about where you're placed?
About what?
About where you actually are a pastor, or
Yeah.
where you're.
I mean, I guess you have a little, I've always gone where they told me to go.
Would you say, no, I wanna stay here?
I think for me to do that, I'd have to have a rational reason, that would be more than I just don't like the idea, there'd have to be a reason why I thought I should be there. Cause that's part of that obedience thing, you make one of those promises.
We could like just, the relationships that you've built with like,
I haven't wanted to leave anytime,
right,
but that doesn't, but they don't, but they'll say, couple times he said, I need you to do this.
So sure, right, you could say, yeah, you know, I don't wanna leave here,
Yeah.
but they'd be like, great, well, we're gonna push over here now. I mean, that was, I mean, that's, again, it's just one of those things where you trust your archbishop to make a decision based on guidance of the Holy Spirit and for the needs of the people, not your own.
Yeah,
Usually though, I mean, a couple times he didn't ask me, he just said, I need you to do this.
That's very subjective. No, every priest and every bishop are his own gifts.
yeah,
And so sometimes it's good for the community to receive new gifts and to offer that. And also good for the priests to develop maybe where they overlap. And use our gifts for the good of that other community too. But it just, I think it's always kind of interesting to have discussions because I've often asked people, like, how long have you been here? Usually like, those people have been 20, 30 years, but have you like loved every associate pastor you've ever had? It's like, yeah. Okay, then when you care if I leave or not, you're gonna love the next guy anyway, right? So, I mean, I think that's kind of true. I think, I can't say for a pastor position, I know for associate pastors, you know, this is kind of a nice place to be. Because nobody really needs, right? When you're a pastor trying to make decisions, people may disagree with you as they would a bishop.
how long have you been associate pastor for?
That is the archbishop.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay.
So you could basically be an associate for life.
So I think
You could basically then be an associate pastor for life.
some guys have in that case. I don't know if that's gonna be practical in the future. But some guys have never had a pastorship. And that happens. That's okay.
Usually it's because of their choosing.
And then in your case, personally, will you advance beyond Monsignor? You don't know.
I just kind of learned to bloom where you're planted,
Okay.
and then I can't worry, I mean, those things are out of my control. I mean, I've had different offices in the diocese, but it's not, has nothing, I don't think most priests are looking
For the advance.
for like
Flat
going up the
funding.
ladder.
Yeah. Okay.
I think most are kind of more of, where do you want me to serve?
That would really be a problem if the priest was directed that way. Right, and you could even make an argument they probably shouldn't have been ordained in the first place.
But it does happen.
Rarely, I think it's more rare. I mean, I don't know any priests that I know if they're actually seeking that. I mean, I don't know about here. Yeah, I mean, I think most guys are just like, I'm going where I'm told and I'm gonna do the best I can where I'm at.
Okay. So then they're following as well as the bishop's council, they're also accepting.
And there's some guys feel they have different calls. We've had a few guys that go in to be military chaplains. They felt a call to that ministry. Maybe they had been in the military, whatever. And so that's the diocese, the bishop has to release him to that ministry.
And I think most bishops take the tack, they want their priests to be Catholic. But also there's a practicality that, well, I need certain people to minister in these circumstances, so you have good gifts, I know those gifts be used.
You don't want to set anybody up for failure. So yeah, that's why they have a personnel board that looks at what are the talents, what's being needed here, try to match them as best as possible.
And they advise the archbishop on those things. But ultimately, yeah, it's only up to the archbishop to determine where we go, what we do.
I've noticed that the deacons seem to stay much longer than the priests usually.
Well, the deacons have families. So it looks like bringing them moving around might be more difficult practically for them. So they are a little more attentive to those practical needs of marriage.
Usually they only move with the deacon wants to move. Retires, but
Yeah, I mean, you could.
some deacons are real active, others are there maybe for 2 hours the whole week, you hardly see them. Depends on their situations in life. So I mean, each one's, it's not disparaging, maybe just they're different places. So that they, so a pope is a priest, then bishop, so he's he, as I said, he ultimately is the chief shepherd. But the practicality, he can't do it all, so he divides it up from bishops and then down to priest, and then there's religious priests that have different charisms. Some teach, some evangelize, some do hospital work or whatever.
Teachers.
And then there's sisters, orders, they're doing the same thing. They're usually with a community. And they different functions they tend to do. But the structure, I guess, is that, so the thing was on the papacy, as I said, there's, depends what you talk about there, if you say the Holy See, you're usually talking about the aspects that makes up the universal, more the spiritual side. The Vatican or Vatican City has to do more the political side. And the Pope is the Bishop of Rome, the primacy. He is the head of the structure of the church, so he also he's considered head of that country. There's been about 280 bishops.
Always 266, right?
Is it 266? I can't remember the number. As I knew it was there,
Since St. Peter.
right. Some of I think 13 days is the shortest. And like 35 years is the longest.
Wow.
The price of mine.
Yeah.
Leo 13.
Leo 13, or is it 5? Yeah. And so there's John Paul II was 32 years, like, yeah, 78 to 05. 27, 78 to 05, yeah, 27.
He's the second longest, I think.
He's about 4, maybe 3rd. All right, anybody have any questions? So that's just to give you some understanding when you think about somebody of some of the who these people are, the structures. Its main purpose, though, everything is for the care of the souls. So that's ultimately why all this is being done. That's what Jesus came, he had to care for the soul. So we're ultimately, all those things that are there are hopefully pointing towards that one purpose. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just very briefly, next week is gonna be the second scrutiny, so the same thing, come 9 o'clock mass, we'll call you up, have certain rights and other things. Then we'll dismiss you after, the blessing. And then also next week, we're gonna talk about life and price. I believe Lynn is leaving us on that, is that right? That's correct. Wonderful, so see you next week.
So if you want to read ahead, read the man born blind.
That's the gospel.
And
next
one
week.
donut,
So they're all gonna, how's your wrist doing?
Much better. I've got 3 weeks of this, and then I can start barely.